Hello, and welcome back to the Madness and Grace podcast. Today, it's just the usual hosts, me and Matt, and we're going to be discussing something that we get so many questions about. Anytime we ask, send in questions for us, it seems like there's always a question on narcissistic personality disorder, which is really interesting. So we're going to kind of dive deeper into that. Yeah, Matt, how's it going today?
Going well. This is a very, it's an interesting topic, and it's a topic that everybody asks about, but I think people will be a little bit surprised. It's not quite what people think it is.
Mm-hmm. We can dive into some questions that, just kind of the most common questions we get. A couple are from listeners, and a couple are just some general questions about the disorder. So let's dive right in. So Matt, for our listeners and those who may not be familiar with the disorder and what it entails, can we just go over what it means to be a person with narcissistic personality disorder? What qualities or characteristics would one look for, maybe in themselves or just someone in their life?
Yeah, the first thing I would say, and I think the thing that people forget, is this is a disorder. So this is not just being arrogant. This is not just being kind of prideful. Mm-hmm. Lots of people are arrogant. Lots of people are maybe not the nicest people in the world. That does not make them narcissistic.
Right.
They may have narcissistic traits, mm-hmm. but this is a disorder we're talking about. So narcissistic personality disorder is characterized by extreme feelings of self-importance, a very high need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. And so, people with narcissistic personality disorder often exploit others for their own gain. They're overly sensitive to criticism, mm-hmm. to judgment, or to any kind of failure. They'll see any kind of criticism or judgment as a threat. And so, I think if you had narcissistic personality disorder, it's virtually impossible that you would recognize that you had it,
right,
just because of the nature of the disorder. So you're less likely to recognize that you have something wrong with you,
yeah,
and push that out on others. As far as looking for it in loved ones that you might have or someone that you might know, again, look for those three main characteristics. Extreme feelings of self-importance, a high need for admiration, a lack of empathy, but also the kind of behavioral manifestations of that. They're kind of manipulative and exploitive of others, and overly sensitive to any kind of criticism or judgment. As far as the diagnosis itself goes, there's a whole set of criteria that a person has to meet, to actually be diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder. Just to give you an idea of a few, they actually have to have 5 of a set of 9 criteria. So shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes, is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her, lacks empathy, as I said, is interpersonally exploitive, they take advantage of people, has a sense of entitlement, requires excessive admiration, believes that he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with special kind of people. Mm. And so, there's a number of others, but we're talking about extreme behavior here, and that behavior is so extreme it certainly doesn't make it possible for that person to have really kind of functionally healthy relationships. Mm-hmm. So they're unsuccessful certainly in the relationship area. They may have a set of dysfunctional relationships. They also are likely to be dysfunctional in other areas, be that job or school, but certainly in their area of relationships are going to be pretty dysfunctional.
Yeah, and I think that's a big misconception is the CEO up in the tower who's arrogant and whatever, but he's really successful. People would label him as a narcissist, but that's not usually the case. Usually they're quite dysfunctional in most areas.
Right. I think that, you can be very arrogant, yeah, and not have narcissistic personality disorder. And you can be pretty sensitive to criticism and not have, when we use the term disorder, we're talking about crossing a line towards dysfunction. Yeah. And so, if the person is, really successful in their job and they have some, mm-hmm. they may be limited, but they have some healthy relationships. Well, then you're probably not looking at a disorder. You might be looking at the traits, or, that doesn't mean they're a nice person.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about narcissistic personality disorder, just like something like borderline personality disorder, or antisocial, or any of the personality disorders, we're talking about a disorder.
Well, what you said about looking for characteristics in oneself, you wouldn't be able to recognize it in yourself because you don't think anything's wrong with you, that kind of thing, which leads into our next question that actually came from one of our listeners. how is someone diagnosed since they refuse to admit that they have issues, and how can someone help them?
Well, number one, the vast majority of people, somewhere between 50 and 75% of people that are diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder are men. So it's not that it doesn't occur in women, it just occurs a lot less in women, and that may have something to do with socialization. But typically you're looking at a man. The majority of people that have narcissistic personality disorder that end up in a clinic or with a counselor or a therapist for treatment are there for one of two reasons. One, they have strained the limited relationships they have to the point that they've been basically threatened that if they don't go and get help, their marriage will end, their job will be gone, whatever. And so they show up in an attempt to kind of capitulate, help. Usually it's manipulative. I'll go, and then they don't usually see. Or the other reason is they've shown up to try to treat the associated or co-occurring disorders that go along with it. People with narcissistic personality disorder oftentimes have substance use problems. Depression is a very common comorbid issue, and because they recognize their own frailty and weaknesses, they recognize the problems they have in a grander scheme. They don't recognize that it's their fault, but that, causing them to be depressed. Anxiety disorders are very common. So they'll show up at a clinic for a treatment of depression. They'll show up for a treatment of anxiety disorders. So that's how people will tend to show up. And so I think that, as far as how do you get somebody help, those are probably your best. I will tell you that, threatening somebody, I'm going to leave you and take the kids or whatever if you don't go get some help, almost never works. Right. Certainly if we're dealing with narcissistic personality disorder. They might go once or twice just to kind of calm things down, and then they'll be back to their same old self. But what I would say is, these things don't usually exist in a vacuum. So the idea of how about getting some help for your substance use problem? How about getting some help for your, you really struggle with anxiety, let's get some help for that, or depression. Get help for these co-occurring issues. It does a little good to take someone with full-blown narcissistic personality disorder and set them down in marital counseling, with their wife, and if they're not getting some kind of treatment themselves. And so my suggestion is always to say, well, you're not where you want to be, and they're usually not. How can we help you move forward? Yeah. And first focus on any kind of coexisting disorders, because they're more likely to get help for those, and that certainly will help them and make things better. And then maybe as they're getting help for those, or maybe as they're getting help to try to move forward, be that with a job or a relationship, whatever, the therapist may be able to work on some of the narcissistic issues without them necessarily having to admit that they have that. I mean, when you tell somebody that they have narcissistic personality disorder, the first thing they're going to do is go Google it. And that's usually the last time you ever see them. So it's not uncommon to not tell them that that's what you think they have. And so it's not something you Google and go, oh, well, yeah, that explains everything.
And I imagine it's frustrating to have someone in your life that you think has this disorder, and it might be hard to say, not say, well, you're a narcissist. It kind of takes a lot of mental strength to be able to maneuver this situation.
Right. So. Personality disorders are different than, really, other types of mental health disorders. I mean, it is a very deeply ingrained problem. And, what you have is a person who, really that's who they are. It's a rigid, maladaptive set of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that they really have probably manifested at some level since they were a late adolescent, early adulthood. And, it takes a lot to change that. It's not to say that there can't be some change, but I think you have to have kind of realistic expectations. I mean, it would really be like you saying to yourself, I'm going to completely change my personality. I'm going to not be who I've been for all the years of my life, and I'm going to be a different person moving forward in every situation. And that's not easy to do, particularly if it's maladaptive. And so you're getting a lot of pushback from society. This person certainly recognizes that they have problems, but they're going to push that external. They're going to say, my problems are my boss, my problems are my wife, my problems are my friends, my problem, people outside of the problem. If they would just let me, this is one of the classic things with the narcissist is they constantly are losing jobs or quitting jobs because they don't believe they should ever start at the bottom. They always believe they should start at the top. So, they may have no experience in a given area, but they don't understand why they can't be in charge of the company.
Yeah.
I mean, legitimately don't believe they can't. Why because they're so much smarter than everyone else. There's no reason for them to start out at the bottom because they already have, there's no reason for them to start out, earning their due, in nightclubs, performing with a small band. They should immediately have a record deal and they should be on the radio. They're so much better than everybody else. I mean, that's the level of kind of, it's almost a fantasy sense of who they are.
Yeah, and I'll link to this in our show notes for sure, but you actually did a presentation on narcissistic personality disorder a couple years ago, and something that stood out to me was you said, it's not necessarily delusional, but it's always really grandiose. It's
very grandiose.
Big things that most normal people would not.
And people can have big dreams.
Right.
That's
and it happens.
Thing.
Yeah.
If you've got big dreams, hey, fantastic. And if the next thing you do when you have big dreams is you sit down and you put a plan together of how you're going to get to those dreams. What are all the steps? Maybe I want to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Well, I'm not going to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company if I have no business experience, no business training, and all I did was graduate from high school. That's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
So what it doesn't mean that at this point I can't become that. So what do I need to do? Okay, well, I need to go to college. I need to get a business degree. I need to get some experience. I need to start working I could lay out a plan. It may be a long-term plan, but the person with true narcissistic personality disorder, if their big dream is they're going to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company, they literally cannot maintain another job because they become so frustrated that they're not
that
CEO,
already. Yeah.
Because they don't understand why everyone else doesn't recognize that they simply should be made that. Again, it's not a big dream. It's almost fantasy. It's grandiose in the way the person would describe themselves or their abilities.
When someone, like you said, finally gets into treatment, whether it be for, one of those other underlying things going on, like anxiety, depression, once they're actually in treatment for narcissistic personality disorder, what does that look like? And do people with this disorder, quote unquote, get better? Can they, like you said, become kind of a different person, or is it kind of just little changes?
They can get better. There really is no mental health problem that if a person engages the proper treatment, they will not show improvement. The real issue is finding the right treatment and actually engaging it. So just showing up 2 times to the therapist isn't going to get anybody better. So for narcissistic personality disorder, your best bet from a therapeutic perspective is dialectical behavior therapy, DBT. That has been shown to be effective with personality disorders that fall into the cluster that narcissistic personality, like borderline personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder. Those all kind of overlap. And so there's a lot of problems with empathy, a lot of problems with impulse control, a lot of problems with kind of mood or emotional regulation. So DBT does work with that. Now, it's a very intensive, kind of long-term psychotherapeutic intervention. And do most people with narcissistic personality disorder hang in there? No, they don't. And so that becomes a problem. Another thing that a therapist can work on with someone with narcissistic personality disorder is kind of coping skills, helping them kind of improve their ability to deal with criticism, to deal with stress in general. And so they can have become to gather a little bit more realistic kind of view of their talents and their abilities. It still may be extreme in comparison to normality, but they may be able to deal with stress better. So coping skill training, which is very straightforward. And then also there has been some work done with empathy building. There are programs to help a person kind of build empathy for others. And the narcissist tends to lack empathy. And so helping them kind of build empathy or others. You see yourself in a different way when you have compassion and empathy for others, and so that's another. And then, as I said before, the easiest thing to do is to try to go and deal with the coexisting disorders, like or coexisting problems like substance use, depression, or anxiety issues. And so, people are much more apt to go and get care for those, and that will make a huge difference as well. A person with narcissistic personality disorder that begins to work on their anxiety disorder, their anxiety issues, learning coping skills, maybe taking some medication for anxiety issues where their anxiety level comes down, they're going to be much more pleasant to be around. They may still have narcissistic personality disorder, but they're going to be might I say, a more pleasant narcissist to be around.
Well, we've talked a lot about how to help that person who has the disorder, their treatment. How would someone dealing with a narcissist or someone they believe to have this disorder help themselves? Like, what kind of advice would you give to someone who thinks that they have a narcissist in their life? And a couple examples I was thinking is, set expectations, boundaries are really important.
Yeah, I've got a few tips that I give to families. The internet can be a wonderful thing, but it's also a curse at the same time. So, if you and I will say this, the reality is that, who we're talking to probably here is predominantly women that are thinking that their husband, their boyfriend, their dad, their uncle, whoever, some male in their life is a narcissist, their boss. And so, when you get online and you Google narcissistic personality disorder and you see those 9 criteria and you decide that your husband, who you don't have a good relationship with, meets 6 out of 9, the best thing to do is not to run to him and go, I figured it out, you have narcissistic personality disorder, you're a narcissist. It does absolutely no good to tell the person that really does have narcissistic personality disorder, or that you think does, that they are a narcissist or they have the personality disorder. It's for anyone they would look at that as insulting.
Right, of course.
And so they're going to see that, and that's only going to make things worse. So if you know that someone has it, or you believe someone has it, keep it to yourself. It does no good to tell them that. I think the second thing is that you need to see them for who they really are. Okay, you need to kind of break the spell. People with narcissistic personality disorder tend to be very charming, and it's these big ideas and grandiose kind of dreams that they have. They seem like a person that with like a real vision for, they want to be, the greatness in them kind of thing. A lot of times people can kind of be sucked in by that, and you kind of begin to believe it. Yeah. And you're disappointed time and time again. So you really need to kind of recognize this is a person that has basically an emotional disorder. They, they're overly sensitive to any kind of rejection, and they have grandiose fantasies of how their performance and their abilities. Yeah. You really need to recognize them for that. And as I said, break the spell. Don't fall into this, that they are really this person, Don't argue with them. That does no good. Zero good. Because you have to remember, they don't see the world the same way you do. Yeah. They really believe a lot of that. Kind of the core of narcissism, though, while they have all these grandiose ideas, the core of narcissism is kind of worthlessness and kind of a sense that you have no value, so you have to overvalue yourself. Yeah. So they're really kind of small and pitiful deep inside. At the core, they're the sad little boy in the corner because he can't do anything. Focus on choices. Focus on the choices that you make and the choices that they make. Set clear boundaries on what you are willing to do for them, because that's what they're going to want. They're going to want you to do everything for them. What are you willing to do for them? Because in every relationship, it's a give and take. So what are you willing to do and what are you not willing to do? And you need to set those boundaries and you need to hold to them. And you need to make good choices for yourself. And you need to expect that they're going to make some good and some bad, but you have to really focus on that. Expect them to push back, because when you set up a boundary, they're going to see that as a threat. Yeah. So expect them to push back. Don't be shocked by that. Remember that, this is not your fault, and you're not at fault for anything. If they're pushing back against the boundary, that's your boundary. Yeah. Hold on to it. And get support for yourself. You need to get into a support group. I know that there are out there, they're not very common, but there are support groups for people who have someone narcissistic personality in their life, but just a general support group for people with mental health, for the caregivers of people with mental health problems, whether you're their caregiver or not, and you're just in a relationship with them, can be very, very helpful for you to have other people to talk to. Or if you don't have a support group, go to counseling. Just have a counselor that you can kind of bounce things off of to help you maintain your boundaries. You certainly can be in a relationship with someone with a narcissistic personality disorder and make that relationship more healthy. But you have to be willing to push back against this constant kind of, almost an assault of, everything, like you're never in charge and you're the one being manipulated. You have to say, I'm in control of this. I'm going to put up this fence around me, and I'm in control of this, and I'm satisfied being in control of this, but I'm not going to allow you to move into that. Right. And so you're going to define what the relationship looks like, and what you're satisfied with and you're not satisfied with. And if they're not willing to, continue that relationship with those boundaries, then it's unlikely that relationship is going to survive unless you completely give in and just allow them to manipulate you and be in control. And that's not a healthy place to be.
Definitely not. I feel like it could be especially hard for maybe someone who has a child, they think,
Absolutely.
Has this disorder, breaking a relationship with them. If it comes down to that, I could imagine that's
I think what you have to do is you have to tell yourself the person has this disorder and they're not willing to get care.
Yeah.
Which is very common. What kind of a relationship can I carve out that won't damage me, but will be able to be sustainable? And there certainly is a relationship that can be carved out there. But you have to make sure that relationship isn't damaging you. And so that's what you have to be concerned about yourself in the relationship, not about the other person, because they're only concerned about themselves. They're not concerned about you.
Right.
And so you certainly can carve out a relationship that's not going to damage you. I wouldn't describe it as a healthy relationship, but it is a relationship that can be maintained. So if you are a parent and you have a child that, an adult child that has this, or you are a wife or a husband and your spouse has this, and you want to try to maintain this relationship because you have children or for whatever reason. But again, if there's abuse in the relationship, or things like that, certainly that's not a safe place for anyone to be, and that person should probably remove themselves from that relationship until that relationship can be made safe. So I'm not saying to stay in there, regardless of whatever, but if you can set up boundaries that you're satisfied with, and that person is willing to respect those boundaries at the level you've set them up, and they have to be realistic boundaries, then you can carve out a relationship.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And like I said earlier, if anyone out there is listening and you kind of want to do a deeper dive, go into more specifics about narcissistic personality disorder, I'm going to link the program Matt did a couple years ago, and you can check that out. We did 20 minutes today, but that one goes a little more in depth, about an hour and 15 minutes. So thank you all for listening. And as always, I'm going to leave all of Hope and Healing Center information in the show notes. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thank you.